Guru Nation, thank you so much for watching and listening. However, you may consume, I really appreciate it. I don't take it for granted that anyone would be interested in some random guy's opinion on the biotech space, but I'm not only do I work in this space, not only have I spent the last 2 decades of my career, really the only career I have to speak of has been in this industry as a clinical research site owner and then a lot of other endeavors I have that I've been fortunate enough to get to be a part of, like Save Our Sites and Patient Ace and Latinos in Clinical Research and so much other stuff. I'm an investor. I'm a biotech investor. I'm a fan of biotechs. I think we're at an interesting place in our country, not just life sciences. I mean, we have so much innovation going on. CRISPR, I'm having a expert on CRISPR technologies coming on tomorrow to discuss all the latest happenings in CRISPR. I've discussed CRISPR before years ago. I recommend the book Codebreaker by Walter Isaacson. It's a biography of Jennifer Doudna and a few others who co-invented the CRISPR technology. We've got massive innovation, but we've also got massive inflation. And those two things kind of counterbalance each other. And I have an entire podcast coming up on treasury rates and how the 30-year treasury rate just went over 5%. I think it's going to end the year close to 6, if not over 6. That's historically bad for biotech. It's actually historically horrible. Biotech has never, as we know, the industry really existed in a high interest rate environment. I know the original biotechs, but I'm talking about in recent history. So I don't want to get too much of that topic into this topic because this one they do relate. Of course they do. We don't live in a bubble. But I wanted to specifically look at FDA fast tracks and why we have fewer approvals despite government intervention. So shout out to Dr. Due Diligence on X. I know Guru Nation doesn't like X for whatever reason. Fine. I'm not here to judge. I do think it's worth getting back on there. The water's warm. You can jump in. I learned a lot, and I recommend Dr. Due Diligence as somebody that you follow. But he tweeted an interesting thread today on specific the lack of FDA approvals and how that's kind of counter intuitive, not intuitive, counter to what the FDA wanted as far as encouraging innovation. And now that we have a new administration, we have Marty Makary, who's the head of the FDA, his book is in my queue, by the way. So stay tuned for the book review. And also Vinay Prasad, who's the head of CBER. I'm about halfway through his book. I've got a lot of interesting opinions. I'll tie some of it into this one. It remains to be seen how they respond to this because on the one hand, Macri mentioned he wanted to reduce the burden, reduce the regulatory burden for getting drugs through the FDA process. And he's all about transparency and let's rethink innovation. And there's pros and cons to that, but they definitely are pro AI, which is supposed to be a deflationary force. Which is very welcome in an inflationary macro environment. And they want to accelerate NDA submissions to help overburden scientific reviewers. And there's a lot of positive that can come out of it, but there's also the flip side. These are, and especially Prasad, very critical of things like surrogate endpoints, which are specifically important in oncology studies, but they're used in other indications as well. Genetic research, they're clearly not going to be fans of business as usual, but business as usual has not been very good. So let me share with you a slide of what Dr. Due Diligence discussed. So here is FDA approvals since let me find the slide. FDA approvals since the PDUFA Act in 1992, right? They're down. And FDA approvals since the 2012 Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act, which passed in 2012 to boost innovation, especially for serious conditions, orphan diseases. We're going to get into that. This may have increased trial rigor and trial complexity as a byproduct. And a lot of people, especially Dr. Due Diligence, he says this is what Dr. Macri is going to be judged on. But I don't actually think the FDA commissioner nor the head of CBER care about more FDA approvals. I think they care about pragmatic approvals. I think they care about actual health outcomes and not so much surrogate endpoints. So I don't necessarily think FDA approvals are going to go up all of a sudden. And if you look at the chart here, you see the median approval rates have been on the decline since PDUFA. I mean, overall, the trend is down. And in one year, there was as low as 10 approvals. I believe this was 2016, was as low as 10 approvals. And so the question that Dr. Due Diligence is asking, and the actual numbers are from 2012, 2000 until 2012, so the PDUFA era, and PDUFA, for those that don't know, is the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. So from 2000 until 2012, the median approvals per year, so in this era, from 2000 to 2012, there was a median of 36.4 approvals per year. After 2012, so let's say 2013 and beyond, which is the FDA SIA era, the Food and Drug Administration Safety Innovation Act, it dropped even lower. It's 15.8 approvals per year. So imagine this line just plummeting after 2012, which is what you see here. These are different types of drugs. This is standard review, all drugs, priority review. I'm going to get into the differences, but it doesn't matter really the differences. What's important is they're dropping when the regulatory regime, the apparatus, was supposed to increase them. And so there's a paradox here. Fewer approvals, but more speed-oriented designations. And this does affect biotech business models, investor sentiment. Post-COVID, the biotechs have been getting crushed. It's post 2021, really. Ever since inflation started popping up, and now it's clear that we're in an inflationary environment, biotechs have been getting crushed. Anyone who's investing in biotechs feels it. Anyone who works at a biotech sees how volatile it is. I don't think it's going to get any more secure. But there's probably a smart way to go about doing this if you're a career seeker and investor. So there's a couple of, let's go through the expedited programs and just explain them real quick so we can have a understanding of the problem itself. So there's five different types of expedited programs. I'm sure Darshan, who's an expert on this, will say, well, there's like a bunch more and there's loopholes, but these are like the most common that I'm aware of. There's the orphan drug designation, which, by the way, if we want to talk about policy shifting outcomes, there is a chart shared by the same Dr. Due Diligence who discusses the orphan drugs approvals. So there actually is some silver lining here. The orphan drugs, which I'm going to show the slide right now, since 2012. This is a chart here of orphan drug approvals. So as you can see, the Orphan Drug Act was enacted in January of 1983, and there was roughly two approvals, 0 to 2 approvals a year, going back as far as 1980. And then you had an increase right after the Orphan Drug Act. You went from two to around nine, six, nine, so let's call it seven. So that's almost a tripling of approvals. Then you had PDUFA, which really had no real impact. But then it did a few years later. You got into the teens on some of the orphan drug approvals. But then in 2012, 2013, when the FDA SIA came out, which again, it's the Food and Drug Administration Safety and Innovation Act, which allowed for things like exclusivity, and it was really aimed at boosting innovation. It had its effect. It doubled and sometimes tripled again the amount of orphan drug approvals, as you can see on the chart. So there was a huge increase in orphan drug approvals, which in theory calls more orphan drug biotechs to come out and innovate. And so orphan drug designation, it's an important one. It's for diseases affecting fewer than 200,000 people in the United States. The benefits are, like I said, 7 years of market exclusivity, tax credits, FDA fee waivers. These are especially valuable for small biotech firms working in niche areas, niche and underserved. The very good news is this administration came out and said that Macri himself said on Megyn Kelly's podcast, why are we requiring two double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trials for orphan disease? Why not just do one and then confirm it in post-marketing? And so that's something that might actually continue to increase the approvals. The last graph you saw were in the between 25 to 30 approvals of orphan drug designations a year. Maybe that doubles again. If you look at the chart, you can see after a policy came in, there was a tripling on average from policy. The first one was from PDUFA. The second one was from the FDA SIA. The third one, even though it's not actual policy yet, you can expect one soon around probably orphan drugs from Macri and his team. And so I think orphan drug designation, IP, super important. And if you can, as an investor, I'm actually looking at these now. And as a career seeker or as maybe a research site looking at rare diseases, this is something to pay attention to. The second type of expedited program is a fast track designation. So these are for serious conditions with unmet medical needs. So not necessarily orphan, maybe a lot of people have it, but with unmet medical need, a lot of cancer conditions fall into this designation. And this is where Vinay Prasad, who's the head of CBER, is in charge of. And he's got a lot of thoughts on this too. As a cliff notes or spoiler alert to the book I'm reading, Malignant, which I recommend everyone read, investors or people working in the industry. He's not a fan of surrogate endpoint. So, what is a surrogate endpoint? Well, it's something that measures things like tumor shrinkage versus overall survival rates. And his thesis is you can game the system if you're a sponsor by only focusing on the surrogate endpoints as opposed to providing an overall benefit to the patients. And that's all fine and dandy, but these things are costing exorbitant amount of money, which ultimately the taxpayers have to pay for, which there's not really, it's questionable at best, according to him, the benefits. So that's just a spoiler alert for my video podcast coming out on the book review. I'm hoping to get Vinay on the show. I'll just keep reaching out. If anyone knows him, let him know. So fast track designation, that's what that is. Breakthrough therapy designation for drugs showing substantial improvement over existing treatments. So you get all the benefits of the fast track benefits plus intensive guidance from senior FDA staff. So again, this is paradigm shifts. Paradigm shifts. So for obesity, the GLP-1s were a paradigm shift. For diabetes, looks like the GLP-1s are a paradigm shift. Those are breakthrough therapy designations. Then you have accelerated approvals, which I do think these are going to go down. This allows earlier approval based on surrogate endpoints. And the reason I think they're going down is because Vinay is specifically against surrogate endpoints. So tumor shrinkage instead of survival, and requires confirmatory trials post-approval, which Vinay was a huge critic of, not the fact that they are done, but the way they're done and not enforced properly. And I'll get into that in the book review too. And finally, the priority review, which is reduces the FDA review time from 10 months to 6, and it's for drugs offering significant advancements in treatments. An example of this is one stock I'm invested in, Aquestive Therapeutics. They actually may get priority review. It hasn't been granted yet, but they've applied for it for their Anaphylm, which is a orally dissolved epinephrine. And so this is for drugs offering significant advancements in treatment. Their argument is the issue with anaphylaxis shock is patients' lack of compliance because they don't like to carry EpiPens with them and they don't keep their auto injectors handy. Whereas with a Listerine strip type of epinephrine that you can put on the back of your phone, they consider that a significant enough advancement in treatment. I do believe that's the case. I don't necessarily know if they'll get priority review. This is not financial advice or a stock advice. It was just an example of a priority review. So, 58% of all drug approvals between 1980 and 2022 used at least one of these pathways. So, more than half used one of these pathways. Now, a good amount of those came in the oncology space from accelerated approval, which I do think are going to go down. And nearly 50% of drugs approved between 2016 and 2022 had orphan drug designation. So that's half of drugs approved in a 6-year period had orphan drug status. So we've built the infrastructure, we've built the regulatory mechanisms for speed, but we might be speeding into a red light because the approvals are down. And the approvals, for the most part, as you can see, they're not all-time lows, but there's nothing exciting about them. Where's the approvals? Like, yes, we see innovations, but where's the actual outcome for society? And there's two schools of thought. One is, well, you're not going to get it, and it's just going to be more expensive, and trials are getting costlier, and anyone who works in the space knows trials are getting costlier. The other one is, and this is, I believe, this administration's philosophy, if we throw gasoline on the fire with AI and with tools to help our end and the sponsor side, so both regulatory and sponsors, get through the data quicker, or in the case of a sponsors, find the drugs, do the trials, and the early stage biotech companies, one of the ways they're going fast is they're going to China for the preclinical work and then coming back here for the trials. So there's development, etc. There's the push for acceleration. There's the push to have programs that cut time to market, and there's the breakthrough therapy, which offers real-time trial design help from the FDA. But there's risks after approval. So the accelerated approval puts the onus on the companies to complete confirmatory trials. These are the phase 4 post-marketing trials, which Vinay Prasad is not a fan of. And small biotechs often lack resources to execute these large post-market studies. So investors love the front end of this, but the back end is where the companies thrive or die. And in the past, they haven't even been enforced like to do the phase 4 trials. And it's something that generally only the larger sponsors would do. Now, if you get a drug approved, the game plan is you partner with a big pharma or you just get acquired by a big pharma and then they'll take care of it. Now, there's industry fallout and there's investor mood, and both of those things are happening now. If you looked at the Endpoints 100 survey, which is a very popular biotech newsletter, biotech executives, so not just anyone, biotech executives now rate capital access as very poor. You cannot run a biotech without cash. It's a very cash intensive business. Anyone who's invested in a biotech stock sees how volatile they can get. There's often what's called a dilutive event where the company has to issue more shares in order to raise money, which means your existing shares and the existing stockholders get diluted. This is good. I think this is going to be a continuing tactic used. So if you're an investor, you got to be careful about many things. And number one is access to capital. It's going to continue to get worse. Treasury bills, the rates are going higher, which establishes a new floor. There's nothing more secure, supposedly, than investing in a 30-year treasury bond. If that's pushing 6%, the floor is why would I invest my capital in this risky biotech when I can get 6% in a treasury bill? So you've got very expensive financing. You've got discount rates. We're going to get into that in the next podcast. That's a preview for it. But this basically means regulatory uncertainty, which is already happening. So you combine regulatory uncertainty with poor access to capital and fewer approvals, and you're not getting a good environment for the industry. So, not to mention what's happening with most favored nation status, which it's gonna remain to be seen what's actually happening. But in this industry, in biotech specifically, it's not enough to cure a disease or to find better solutions. It's you have to figure out the regulatory drag that's happening. And so really the onus is on this administration, Macri, who's a former Johns Hopkins surgeon, definitely qualified health policy reformer. He's seen as the pro common sense head of the FDA now and friendly to innovation. What they could possibly do, there's a couple of things they might be able to do. He's talked about some of them, but one of them, they've discussed AI already, and they've discussed orphan drug disease and how they will only require one study instead of two, and then do the rest in the post-market phase 4 type of trials, real world evidence type of trial. They could reevaluate the FDA SIA guidelines because the post-market burdens are pretty significant. Now, with AI, there was talk about using EMRs, which is electronic medical records, in the real world, de-identified, of course, because none of those patients consented to be studied. They could lighten the post-marketing burdens that way, especially for the orphan disease. Another thing they can do is enable the adaptive trial design. So using real-world evidence and being able to shift a trial, which adaptive trials happen all the time, but they'll allow more of these kind of designs. And then I think the biggest asset of this new administration is their transparency. They're basically putting it out there what they believe in. Again, coming to this book, and Macri's book, I'm sure is going to be similar. This one that I'm pointing, if you're listening, is Malignant by Vinay Prasad. Uh, I think transparency has been the biggest asset of this new administration. And finally, educating investors. So, same thing if you're somebody that's working in this space or if you're somebody investing in this space. Approvals are declining. At the same time, expedited pathways are booming. At the same time, it's getting more expensive and costlier to fund these biotechs. And at the same time, we have all these tools that have never been used before, like AI and real world evidence using AI. So we're on the cusp of unknown, uncertainty. And there's a lot of promise, I guess, depending on how you look at this. And there's a lot of potential stagnation and continual stagnation. So I'll just end this with one more chart. This is the FDA approval year, number of approvals, and specifically what's been approved. So if let me share this chart real quick. Last chart again from Dr. Due Diligence. So after FDA SIA, what you had, if you can see, it might be hard to see, but gene and cell therapies is dark, and we're on the early days of this. I have a CRISPR guy coming on tomorrow. 2022, we had 5 approvals for gene and cell therapies, but this also includes things like CAR T, therapeutic biologics. Well, I guess CAR T would be therapeutic biologics. So therapeutic biologics would be things like monoclonal antibodies, which is the medium shade, which those have been transforming the industry. If you're a site, you know you're getting like monoclonal antibody study offers all the time. I don't think this administration's a fan of those. I think we've heard them repeatedly discuss going back to small molecules as opposed to these large molecules. Uh, Mainly because of cost. Cost is a huge driver of this. So, and then new molecular entities. So I suspect going forward, you're going to see more gene and cell therapy approvals. You're going to see less biologic approvals because the biologics tend to suffer from, at least from what I understand from Vinay, is surrogate endpoints and no clear benefit to the patient when compared with the cost, put in context of the cost. And then new molecular entities, which is always what we're trying to accomplish as far as innovation's concerned. So these are my opinions on what's happening. This is like the state of the biotech industry today. It's a lot of uncertainty, but this is the lay of the land. Hopefully, this helps you understand a little bit better about what's going on, especially with the thought process of the people running these things. And again, I'm trying to give an A on the show, but even if not, I'm gonna have other guests come on who are experts in the space. We've got a CRISPR guy coming on tomorrow. And Darshan always likes to discuss this as well on Fraud Pod, and he has a slightly different take than me. His is more pessimistic of this new administration, while mine tends to be more neutral slash optimistic. But the thing that we can't control as people that invest in the space and that work in the space, we can control which ones we choose to invest in and which companies we think we want to work for or with and or which therapeutic areas we want to become more competent in. We can all control those things to channel my inner stoic. What we can't control is the macroeconomics. And the macroeconomics are not looking good. It looks like an inflationary environment, highly inflationary, continuing to be so, possibly permanent high interest rates for the foreseeable future. The one thing we have that can offset this is the deflationary pressure of AI and technology as a whole, but it's pretty much AI. That could offset the inflationary forces and keep things kind of at status quo. But you saw what the status quo is. The status quo as far as the approvals, they haven't been high. Certain things have been higher than others, like biologics, like orphan drugs. I think those will continue, but I think as a whole, we can expect more of the same, if not slightly worse. And that's just how I see it. You got to be a very careful investor. And if you're a research site, I really think this next 10 years, 5 to 10 years is the golden era of sites. But we're going to see what the macroeconomic headwinds and what policy does this group at the FDA seems to be trying to reduce the regulatory burden, which has been regulatory overkill over the last decade. In the hope in the hope of making things faster, they're actually slowing things down. There is a chance that this administration does the opposite, and then we all get more at bats as investors or as clinic owners or as employees working in this space, contractors. So I think we're at a very important turning point. I don't know where we're actually headed, other than to say business as usual slash slightly lower as far as activity is concerned, unless the regulatory burden is drastically reduced. And the AI, well, yeah, because the AI gets into complicated things that we can't control in our industry, such as access to power and energy and things like that. So that's my take on this. I want to know what your take is. Stay tuned for more. The Treasury bill one, that's pretty concerning. Not gonna lie. Like, subscribe, comment, share. We're in this together, Guru Nation. Bye bye.